Here we are. As we begin today, we're going to start at the very top, at the Watershed Divide between the Rush River to my right here, and you can see the other valley on the opposite side. So the Rush River is not that wide. It's only several miles wide, but you can see the distinct features of where we're standing, and then the top of the watershed on the other side of the river valley. And so when we talk about a watershed divide, we're talking about water that, when it infiltrates through the ground here, some of that water goes to the right and some of it goes to the left. What we'll be doing here for the next part of the morning here is focusing on the water that goes to the left and down into the Gully Valley. But we'll be looking at water where it appears and then disappears and reappears again. But it all begins up here at the Watershed Divide. To the right, we have the Rush River. To the left, we have the Gully. Our first bedrock unit is shale, and with shale being the parent material for the soil, growing row crops like corn and soybeans is not very easy. And so landowners typically will choose to, if they have animals, they'll graze them, but if they don't, they're turning that land into some type of conservation program. In this case, they're probably using the managed forest tax law in Wisconsin to come in and plant trees to best utilize land that has low productivity. So here we are in the corner of County Highway BB and 10th Avenue. And again, where we were last, we were higher up in elevation looking at trees that were planted. But the other option for this land is to have it managed for pasture. And as you can see, we have perennial grasses and forbs. And then we're next to a stream here. This is a headwater stream that's coming out of a wetland up there. There's a little bit more accumulation of the shale, but then water's flowing through this stream. It's not very sinuous, but it would still fall into the category of an E-type channel, probably an E5 or an E4, based on the material that we see here. But this segment of stream here will have water in it pretty much year-round. And that's because this water is sitting perched on top of the shale. The shale doesn't allow for downward movement into the next bedrock layer, and so any type of water that's falling within this catchment is then working its way towards a small tributary like this. And so even in drought conditions, there may still be standing puddles of water here just because that water can't really infiltrate down through the soil. And so from here now, we're going to continue to drop down in elevation. We've already dropped down approximately 40 to 50 feet in elevation from where we started, and we'll be dropping down about another 40 to 50 feet. Standing on a normal dry run tributary to the Rush River this morning. And you can see water spilling over the cobble-sized rock here that was placed to protect this bridge. which is a common practice these days now, is to put in a bunch of rock so that a bridge doesn't get scoured and washed out. But normally, except for maybe 10 days out of the year, this channel runs dry. But it's flowing today because the water table has risen up as a result of all the rain that we've received. And so when the water table rises up, it encounters the channel and then gives rise to flow through the channel. Well, here we are back to this small tributary to the Rush River 10 days later. You can see there's no water running in the channel. That's because we haven't had any rainfall. And this is an intermittent stream. It really only flows when the water table rises up. See, the water table is present here, but it's below the channel bottom right now. And so when it goes below the channel bottom, essentially it's still flowing, but it's flowing in a subsurface fashion. So when the water table rises, and that's typically what happens with rainfall, is that you get more rainfall that kind of comes up, and then that'll fill out the channel, and so it's like a relief valve, and then water will start to move through the channel. But this will remain this way until we get more rain. Now, typically into the summer, when the trees start evapotranspiring, they're basically now pulling up all the water, and so the water table during the middle of the summer may not get high enough unless we get a really large storm event, high intensity, large magnitude, then that water can move down quickly, more quickly than the root zone can pull it back up again. And then water will start to flow through here, but this particular channel really only flows in the spring and in the fall when the trees are not evapotranspiring water. So one of the things that we can do is to look at the moisture content. That then will give us a reading about how saturated the soil is. And if the water is saturated in the soil here, it's a pretty good likelihood then that the water table has come up. But essentially with this unit here, we can push this into the ground and then begin to test the saturation content of the moisture in the soil, and it gives us an indicator of whether or not water is going to be able to move down through the soil, or in some cases, if water is already ponding on the ground, that's going to lead to an overland pathway of flow directly to the channel because the soil is already saturated. And this here device here gives us information on the relative degree of soil saturation. And right now, this soil right here is fairly moist, which we would expect in the springtime. Again, if we were out here in August, this soil would probably be pretty depleted of moisture. But typically in the spring, after a snow melt, the soil moisture content is generally going to be high this time of year. And indeed, that's what the meter is telling us today. So what we're looking at here is a need to get rid of excess animal manure, but that you really have to understand the soil moisture conditions. And as we were testing earlier with the soil moisture probe, clearly you can see there's still some standing water here, and that standing water should be gone given that it's been over 10 days since we've had some rainfall. But the person that needed to get rid of the manure kind of came in here, and you can see they've actually really mucked up the topsoil. They've disturbed the topsoil. They've made kind of a mess as a result of trying to get rid of that manure under highly saturated conditions here. That's the challenge of trying to manage a soil whose parent material is shale. So here we are, standing where the surface water ends. From this point further downstream, there is no more surface water. It has disappeared. It's all below ground. Now, what's happened is that we've dropped about another 50 foot in elevation, and as a result, we're out of the shale, because it was the shale that was holding that water near the surface. But now we're into a carbonate bedrock as the first unit underneath the channel. And as a result, that water is essentially, as it moves through the sand and gravel bed here, it's just seeping into the sand and gravel and disappearing. And so, in some cases, a hole can open up, as we've talked about before, but for the most part, in a losing reach like this, the water is just kind of seeping into the sand and gravel and going subsurface. And so then, as we look downstream here, there is no surface expression of the stream flow anymore. But that doesn't mean the stream isn't there. The stream is still here. It's just gone subsurface. Now, from a water quantity perspective, this isn't a problem, but from a fisheries perspective, not having water on the surface can be a bit of a problem, because there's no place for the fish to be able to then migrate and connect to the downstream part of this channel and the upstream part of this channel under lower flow conditions. Again, 10 days ago, when we had the snow melt and there was some rainfall that occurred over the course of a day, this whole system was rushing, and you can see debris that's been caught on the vegetation here, and the sand deposited on the floodplain. You know, this whole system was full of water as it came rushing through here, and so that surface expression continued until we went far enough down on the receding limb of the hydrograph to then get what you see today. Now, the channel that we're looking at here has undergone some transformation. You can see from these roots that are here that at one point the channel elevation was a little higher, but there's a certain amount of degradation and scouring that's been occurring, but yet at the same time we see that there's some sand being deposited up here on the active floodplain. And so there's a lot of sediment transport and deposition that's going on in this system, and again, it's not necessarily tied to the time of it's tied a lot to the time of year, because when you don't have a lot of plants and crops growing in the spring and in the fall, water will rush through here more quickly. And if we were to classify this out here, further up on both sides here, this system is somewhat slightly entrenched, but the channel that we're looking at here probably fits a classic B type 4 channel, given that we have gravel as the predominant bottom of the channel here. If we were a little bit more constrained, this would probably be more of a G type channel, but we do have an active floodplain within our incised geometry, and so this then does fit more closely into the B4 type stream classification.
Right here's where the sinkhole was last week. Here's the water flowing down, 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 down. And here's the water disappearing under this week's sinkhole. You can see it's puddling here, but it doesn't leave. So I guess that's the new sinkhole that can handle 30, 40 gallons a minute, 50, I don't know. Anyway, that's how sinkholes work around here, I guess. Well, how about that? It's May 5th now, and our sinkhole wasn't plugged up after all. There was just too much water for it, I guess. So now it's back to looking just about like it was here a week or two ago. And we see no more water here, and we'll go down there in just a minute and look at the hole that was the newer sinkhole 2 or 3 days ago. We can't look down the sinkhole. We'll go over by the tree over there. And of course this was taking all the water that got this far 2 days ago. And of course 2 days ago there was a little ponding here, but that's all dried up too. So I guess that's kind of the story. It'll be just kind of interesting to see how long the that sinkhole.
So we've only driven about a mile, but now you can see that there's water back in the surface channel. And as a result, what's happened is we've dropped down to a lower elevation now where the water table has intersected to the surface. And so we will have flowing water here today. In the summertime, we may not necessarily have flowing water if the water table drops too low. But for today, we have water because, again, we're in the spring of the year, and so our stream channel that had been flowing above went subsurface, but now it's emerged to the surface only because we've dropped far enough in elevation that we've encountered the whole water table. And this is what we're looking at is the elevation of the groundwater table here now. And that's why we have a flowing stream. All the vegetation has been pushed over here, and this tells us exactly how much high flow water we had earlier 10 days ago with a storm event that came through here. Whereas the vegetation that's still standing back here is not reflective of where the high water table got. But this is probably will fall pretty much close to within a C-type stream type channel, because again our width depth ratio here is probably going to be right around 12. It could be an E, could be a C-type channel, but the flood prone area is greater than 2.2, and so water can spread out onto an active floodplain here and dissipate its energy. So now we have dropped down to an elevation that's just slightly above the base elevation of the Ogaulee River. And we're looking at a spring-fed tributary. This water runs year-round. In the wintertime, this is running as well as in the middle of summer when trees are fully evapotranspiring water. This represents the regional groundwater discharge into the Ogaulee system. And so we're right here, probably about 10 feet elevation above where this spring then runs into the Ogaulee River itself. So now we are at the sort of almost confluence of this tributary to the Ogaulee River, and we're actually gaining flow now because we're picking up far more groundwater. In fact, this tributary here would be considered a cold water fishery because the predominant flow, at least today, is 90% groundwater. So what we're looking at here is a classic E4 type channel. It's got a little steeper slope than most E-type channels as it's dropping into the Ogaulee River. Its particle size is typically a little bit bigger than what we see in an E-type channel, but it fits the criteria quite well for an E channel. Its width-depth ratio is less than 12, but its entrenchment ratio falls quite well within greater than the 2.2, because water can spread out quite a bit to the right. It's a little bit constrained on the left due to the road that's here, but water can escape off to the right into an active flood-prone area. Our particle size is much, much larger now than where we began our journey in the headwaters of this watershed. Now, over a decade ago, there was a major storm that came through here. It was about 8 inches of rain that fell in less than 24 hours. And as a result of that, there was a lot of material that got picked up and moved and deposited. And so this channel today is recovering from that storm event. As we look downstream, there's some evidence of where the channel did downcut, but it's not eroding, and hasn't really eroded in the last decade as a result of the size of the cobble material that then can protect that outer bank. That's not to say it's not going to erode, but the problem is there's not enough stream power to pick up and move this material and build the bed back up to where it once was. And so as a result, this is going to go through some slow channel evolution over time.